Logan Long on the left with Dredgeless Dredge. We've got a treat for you. Blake Matson, you've seen today on the right with Rakdos mid-range. But I'll tell you, we're in for a treat watching this Dredgeless Dredge deck go to work.
Yeah, Logan's deck is an absolute banger. Just at a 4-1 record right now. There's we mentioned there's a couple of Aether Drift cards. One of them you see on your screen right here, Dredger's Insight, which is a card that allows you to mill some cards. I believe it's mill 4, and then whenever one or more creature or artifacts leave your graveyard, you gain a life, and when the mill 4, you get to put an artifact, creature, or land from among the milled cards into your hand. Now you'll notice there's Stitcher Supplier, there's Dredger's Insight. There's also a lot more self-mill here. We have Cash Grab, Tome Scour, and Otherworldly Gaze. So 20 cards that allow you to self-mill. And then you'll see that Narcomoeba that just hit the battlefield. So whenever that gets milled over, you can get that back. We have Bloodghast, we have Prized Amalgams, Silver Smoke Ghouls to pair with Creeping Chills. There's a lot going on here, Corbin, and I am very excited to see how this deck goes. And there's a lot of power in the battlefield already. That's 4 power on turn 2.
This is wild. I know we called it Dredgeless Dredge, and then immediately called out Dredger's Insight being played, but maybe shout out to Wizards for the naming there. They knew what they were doing. But this is you look, Torch the Tower to exile the Stitcher Supplier. That's great and all, but having any piece of spot removal when your opponent is just looping all of these creatures that you've seen, if you're a modern fan, a veteran of that format, you've seen these creatures before. And if not, if you're newer to the game, well, Narcomoeba is one of the most messed up Magic cards ever printed, and you just wouldn't expect it. It just gets milled. It usually historically powers Dread returns by putting them into play along with the Dread return into your graveyard. In this deck, you're just milling enough cards through that it just comes into play, gives you power to do everything you want. And if you sacrifice engines, and all of these creatures just come back through removal. And Cash Grab, here we go, talking about recent additions to the deck. Another way to get 4 cards into your graveyard while putting one of them into your hand. And that in the Dredge deck often equates to drawing 2 or 3 cards.
Yeah, Corbin, we got a reader here for Driven to Despair. I don't know if we can get that one up on screen. That is a card that probably a lot of people have never seen before in their entire life. This is in one of those Aftermath cards. So basically, on the front half, you can cast the Driven, and then if it's in your graveyard, you can cast the Despair half, which is until end of turn, all of your creatures gain whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card. So if you can imagine you're putting a lot of small creatures onto the battlefield, like Narcomoebas, Bloodghasts, Prized Amalgams, all that kind of stuff, basically for free with all of your self-mill. You put a lot of stuff onto the battlefield, flash that thing back, basically your opponent discards their entire hand. As far as the matchup is concerned, we said Steve Blake playing the Rakdos mid-range deck. One thing I want to touch on that you mentioned is Blake has a lot of kill spells, right? Fatal Pushes, Torch the Tower does exile, but Fatal Push, Go for the Throat, all those kinds of removal spells, those don't really work that well against Prized Amalgams, Bloodghasts, and Silver Smoke Ghouls that can just come back over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned Driven to Despair. Narcomoeba has never been so threatening.
That's why we play it. I mean, look, I every time my opponent flips over a Narcomoeba, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty threatened because that means they're up to no good. So
that's right. Nothing good has ever come of that card. I remember when I first got into Magic, I had heard of sort of the mythical Dredge deck in Legacy, and the first time I loaded it up on Magic Workstation and looked at a hand of 7 cards, I legitimately did not know what to do. I quite literally did not know how I was supposed to make my deck do anything. And I think that honestly excited me about Magic, right? That's really cool piece of discovery. And that's what I see when I see the Dredgeless Dredge deck is just cards coming together in ways that were not expected.
Yeah, and as this game is progressing, there was a duress there from Blake, and getting a look at Logan's hand. So the Dredge deck is very good when it can kind of chain a bunch of enablers, but looks like Logan has drawn a lot of the cards you don't want to. The leftovers in the hand right now are Narcomoeba and 2 Prized Amalgams. You want those in the graveyard, not in the hand. And then Blake has developed a second copy of Unholy Annex, and you actually just saw there Logan use a Boseiju on the blade of the Oni and not one of the annexes to prevent the life loss there, rather than kill one of the annexes to draw cards. So really, that's a sign that Logan is just trying to protect his life total as much as possible. I mean, at 10 life against 2 annexes and a Mutavault, I'm not sure he's gonna have the ability to do that, as I think he picked up another Narcomoeba, and like I said, that's not really where you want those cards.
Yeah, this is we're seeing the downside, the fail rate of the deck play
Yeah,
out here as you know rip Narcomoebas off the top of the deck into your
plan
hand,
B.
not into your graveyard. Yeah, I guess it is nice that you can play the amalgam out, right, and it doesn't take a ton to start a bit of a you know parade of creatures out of the graveyard. And it is true that the Dredger's Insight, the new addition to the deck, that 1 point of life you gain every time something leaves your graveyard. Now, it may not be hugely relevant in this one, but it does come up, right? It's not irrelevant, certainly, over the course of a game. But here we go. More follow up from Blake, who, of course, has just access to all the cards he could want thanks to the pair of Unholy Annexes there.
Right. And you see here, I mean, Blake is playing a whole bunch of creatures. Maybe he doesn't have any great attacks into the prized amalgams, but the thing is, Blake doesn't have to attack. He's dealing 4 damage a turn to Logan. And, with the life gain that Annex provides, it's going to be really hard for Logan to sort of mount any sort of lethal attack. We talked about that Driven Despair in the graveyard. Doesn't look too bad here. There's 3 creatures in play. Blake's got however many cards in hand. But problem is, if you Driven to Despair and attack with all, you're just dead on the crackback, even without, just having creatures in play. Just the 2 annexes and the Mutavault represents lethal by itself. And yeah, Blake, unfortunately for Logan, just, had a couple of the enablers early, but kind of didn't really get any of the crazy mills off, and just ended up drawing a bunch of cards that you're not supposed to draw. This is usually how the post board games of,
Right.
I'm sure you're used to Dredge decks. This is kind of how Dredge plays post board when your opponent has graveyard hate. It's just, cast Prized Amalgam, cast Prized Amalgam, cast Narcomoeba, and not what you're looking to do game one.
This is just a really interesting game because I mean Logan's objectively ahead with the creatures on board, but those unholy annexes just completely took it over. It also kind of matters, right? That Blake's removal, as we now see him fire off even more removal, but that his early removal was Torch Tower, so he was able to exile that
Ho, ho, ho,
Citrus
ho.
Supplier and prevent another 3 cards getting milled.
We see a reconfigure here on the fear of missing out. That is what we call a comp. Never seen anybody reconfigure that. I think it turns it into what, a 5/5? Is it a 5/5 flyer? Let me look up Blade of the Oni. It reconfigure turns it into a 5/5 menace. So Blake cleared the blockers there and was able to attack with the fear. And you can untap itself too. But as far as the sideboards, what is Logan working with here in the sideboard here, Corbin?
Yeah, well, so sort of the one of the issues is that if you're Logan, you want to pick up that game one before your opponent has access to their graveyard hate.
Hmm.
So that's gonna be difficult. We looked at his sideboard; it's actually more reactive, right? Like all of these cards are reactive cards. So I comes down to what he's willing to trim. I mean, we were talking about otherworldly gaze, right? In the pregame is barely being a playable Magic card, and yet pretty decent in this deck.
Hey, hey, don't
Pretty
besmirch the
decent
name of
in this
Otherworldly
deck, I'll
Gaze.
say. But you look, Tome Scouring himself, surely you can cut it somewhat at the edges here. I'm not sure, obviously, Logan does where you can afford to trim, but you can trim and then kind of adjust to what you want. Now, looking at that sideboard, do you want any of those cards against your just generic Rakdos mid-range value opponent?
Well, you brought up a great point here, Corbin,
Mhm.
which is, game one versus post board games. And when you're playing a deck that's sort of this all in as the Dredgeless Dredge deck is, you expect your opponents to have copious amounts of graveyard hate. So you see a lot of kind of generic answers here, like Into the Floodmaw, Pick Your Poison, Witherbloom Command. Those can take care of most of the sideboard cards that are played, like Leyline of the Void, Digger's Cage, Soul Guide Lantern, Rest in Peace, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So if you expect your opponent to have lane lines, the Pick Your Poison seem pretty good. Maybe the Flood Maw as well. I don't think you want to bring in the kill spells because a lot of the creatures in the Rakdos deck are sort of interchangeable.
Right.
Like, they're all just kind of random threats. So I think you just want to target the lane lines specifically if you expect those. Past that, maybe not a ton else here.
Yeah, let's move on and look at the Rakdos sideboard because I mean that's basically what this comes down to is these post board games. How much sideboard or graveyard hate does Blake have? And that's where we start, and it looks like a decent amount, right? Extinction Event, if he wants it, Exiles, that could be relevant. But hey, those unlicensed hearses are certainly where we're going to start.
Yeah, hearses and I think the Hidetsugus are going to come in as well. Now,
Hmm.
it's a little weird because Hidetsugu doesn't exile the graveyard until chapter 2. So it's not graveyard hate the turn that you play it, in the sense of you play the Hidetsugu, then you're giving Logan one turn to do whatever he wants to do with his graveyard, and then chapter 2 flips, gets the graveyard. So Logan can still have an explosive turn in the face of Hidetsugu,
Right.
but it kind of cleans everything else up. So I think you want it, and then the hearses as well probably coming in. The torch is fantastic too. Just being able to exile that Stitcher supplier, I think that's something that Blake really wants.
Yeah, so Blake doesn't have, and I don't even know how many years since it's been playable, but sort of the best sideboard card in many games against these dredge decks was always Anger of the Gods, because it was a sweeper that exiled, and there's no access to any of that for Blake. So once you get the graveyard hate, you're then still leaning on your one for one removal, or your other removal in the deck as it pertains to the creatures Logan puts out, and then you exile them. So you do kind of have to deal with them on the front end and then have the graveyard hate for the back end, as opposed to one card being able to catch you up in all ways here.
Yeah, and one thing that Hidetsugu does do, if Blake decided to keep in some of his kill spells, is you can say you tap out for the Hidetsugu, and then Logan has a turn where he puts a couple of creatures into play. You can respond to the chapter 2, use your kill spells, then resolve the chapter 2, exile the graveyard.
Right,
So that could help
exactly.
clean up some of those like amalgams and silver smokefuls that could potentially come in on that one turn window that Logan has.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it looks like Logan also dredging deep into the mulligan well here, which is maybe not where he wants to be.
I mean, I will say, as far as decks that mulligan well are concerned, I feel like this is one of the ones that does
Hmm.
mulligan pretty well, because if you look at the deck list, and this is kind of exactly the problem that Logan had game one, he drew a bunch of cards that you didn't want to draw. Bloodghast, Narcomoeba, Prized Amalgam, Silver Smoke Ghoul. These cards don't really do anything in your hand, right?
Right.
So if you mulligan, say you mulligan to 5, you look at a 7 card hand that has 2 of those creatures, 3 enablers, and 2 lands. You just easily put back the 2 of those creatures, keep 2 lands, 3 enablers, and your hand is not necessarily where you are getting value. It's the top of your library when you're putting cards into the graveyard. So if you mulligan to a hand that has 2 enablers, that's going to be better than, a 7 card hand that has 2 of those creatures, for example.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well said. And there we go with the classic Pioneer opening of Botanical Sanctum.
Tom Scour
Home Scour
myself.
myself worked out kind of in that, not great, but I saw one ghoul in there. There's a Creeping Chill that was exiled that drains for 3 when it hits your graveyard. That was the big addition from Guilds of Ravnica to the deck that kind of was a big part of the resurgence, along with Silver Smoke Ghoul around that same time.
Yeah, and I mentioned, Logan wanting to have a hand of a couple of lands and a couple of neighbors. Looks like we had one land, a Tome Scour, and then still had a Bloodghast and a Silver Smoke Ghoul left over. So, not really exactly what Logan is looking for. And I think he's
Yeah.
seeming to not finding land number 2 here. Maybe picked up a copy of Cash Grab or a Dredger's Insight, but just unable to cast those yet.
Yes, I fear we cursed the cool deck by putting it on camera
Yeah.
here to show off. But I promise it doesn't always look like this, folks. No, Logan kept this 5 and gave a little shake of his head. He had the turn 1 Tome Scour and knew that it was tap the top of the deck time. We actually saw a example of this yesterday where it did pay off for a player, where they kept a hand that, hey, if I draw it, it looks great, and if I don't, it's going to look terrible on camera, but the odds say to keep it. And they did, and it worked out. And here we do see the Dredger's Insight off that second land. Maybe it's too late for Logan, maybe not. I mean, there's a bunch of value, but no explicit graveyard hate from Blake yet.
One thing that I also kind of didn't register with the Dredger's Insight, so Silver Smoke Ghoul is a card that typically only comes back off of Creeping Chill,
Right.
but if you can have a turn where you can have a good enough mill where you put 3 creatures from your graveyard into play, that's going to gain 3 life off the Insight, and that will also trigger the Silver Smoke Ghoul, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, just some added redundancy for the deck.
But we're not
All
getting
right.
to see that this game.
Yeah, Kiki Jiki, or the reflection of it anyway, is flipped over.
Look, Logan is 4-1. I promise he's done the thing at least a couple of times today. But like you mentioned, the caster curse, as it were. That's how it always goes.
Yeah, looking good for Blake though. About to move to 5-1 here. Classic Rakdos mid range. Piloted it very well. The deck, of course, is able to react to anything your opponent is doing. And while I would actually think that maybe this could be a challenging matchup for it, he was able very effectively in that first game to leverage a good removal suite, including that key Torch the Tower. But all right, Logan's going to try to work his way back into this. We have another mill. Okay, here we go. There's a
Who's
Narcomoeba in
that?
play. We're going to surveil 3 with the Otherworldly Gaze. Creeping Chill.
I love how Otherworldly Gaze, for those of you at home who don't know, it's 1 mana Surveil 3. Logan didn't even look at the top 3. He
Yeah.
just immediately put them in the graveyard. Like he knows what's going on, and I respect that.
Well, this wasn't bad. The Narcomoeba came back. We gained life off the Creeping Chill. We gained life off the Dredger's Insight. The Silver Smoke Ghoul now back in play as well. Now, clearly, Blake is still very, very ridiculously far ahead, and you're seeing Fatal push on a Narcomoeba, Torch the Tower on the other creature, just a one citrus supplier left. But hey, if you're Logan, I guess that was step 1, was at least getting something going here.
Yeah, I don't know if Blake can present lethal. We can copy the demon. That's 14 plus the annex is 16 with Logan at 17. So kill spell would not quite do it because kill spell would mean the 16. Because as of right now, Logan can shump block one of the 2-power creatures, which presumably he will do. So that'll take 12 and fall to 5, then 3 off of the annex.
Well, and this was a game here too. Blake didn't have any of his sideboard hate. At least we didn't feel the need to play any of it, and he probably would have by this point. Logan's deck in a sideboard game had the potential. Like, it's done a lot. If he hadn't missed that second land drop, this would have all happened before there were Kiki Jikis and before there were demon tokens, and everything obviously looks very different. As it stands now, I'm not sure. His deck is sort of a win by accumulating value on the board deck. You don't think there's anything we can draw here that can dig us this far out of a hole.
Yeah, Logan's deck is not great at playing from behind. You know, a lot of his creatures also enter the battlefield tapped, right? Prized Amalgam and Silver Smoke Ghoul. As good as those cards are, they do enter the battlefield tapped, so they can't block the turn they come into play. Same with Bloodghast. Bloodghast also can't block. So you kind of really need that one turn window to be like, okay, here's a bunch of stuff. Give me one turn, then I can untap and do some stuff. But yeah, even if Logan has a pretty big pop-off turn with such a low life total against Annex, Demon, and Reflection, I'm not really sure that Logan's going to have the ability to answer them all. And with Blake at 16, it's also really hard to, like, even if you have a kind of a psycho mill with multiple creeping chills, and you can think about that, because I think I think we still have 3 left at this point.
Yeah, you're right. The big life swing would be the way to go here. Amalgam into the graveyard. So this is the Haunted Dead can return and makes a token, I believe, when it does.
Yep. Yeah, Haunted Dead is 2 mana, discard 2 cards, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and when it enters, it makes a 1/1 flying spirit. You notice Logan discarding the Prized Amalgam. Because discarding is part of the cost, you can discard the Amalgam to the Haunted Dead, and then the Amalgam will see the Haunted Dead come back.
Haunted Dead's a one of in the list. One of those nice, just kind of like the Driven to Despair, just added value that doesn't always come up, but occasionally does. And I mean, for as far behind as Logan was last turn, you can see the deck working. Look at, we refilled the deck. We're back up to 7 life. Don't think it's going to be enough here, but pretty good for a game in which you missed your second land drop for 3 turns.
Yeah, like you said earlier, going back to what you were talking about, imagine this game if Logan just hit that second land, maybe, a couple, like 3 turns earlier, the turn that he could have hit it. So, yeah.
There we go. All right, handshake out. Blake Madsen picks it up, moves to 5-1. Remember, there's only 7 rounds today here. We had just over 100 players in this Pioneer event, and that means we are just 1 round away from the top 8. And that means that our Rakdos player there finds himself perhaps a handshake, perhaps 1 win. We'll see how it plays out away from that top 8. We're going to see if we can get an interview with them. Cool Dredge deck, but hey, sometimes it feels pretty good just to be on the side of the nice, fair, I'd say Jund deck. In this case, it's a Rakdos deck, but it's all kind of the same fair red-black deck.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the printing of Unholy Annex really changed the game and how these Rakdos decks can play.
Yep.
Because Unholy Annex provides you a consistent source of card advantage, but also provides you with a win condition that doesn't need to use the combat step.
Right.
And makes Mutavault a lot more potent. We see Blade of the Oni in these decks as a 2 mana demon to be able to have that curve of Blade into Annex to pressure them. That's 5 damage by turn 3, and you're drawing extra cards.
Hmm.
So it gives you ways to race those combo decks, but also a ton of built-in card advantage to like play into the late game, which Rakdos decks had in the past, but this is one of the kind of more upfront ways of doing it.
Yeah, we've come a long way from the days of Reckoner Bankbuster being banned because it was the best 2-drop in the Rakdos deck, um, which was a thing that was once. Obviously, Fable has been a real backbone of these decks, but this new angle has really leveled it up in these formats. And let's talk to Blake about it. Let's head on down to the
Hey.
booth. Blake Madsen, congratulations, just moving to 5-1, I believe, is your record with Rakdos Demons. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell us about obviously that did you that match was a little. I don't know if you expected to see Dredgeless Dredge today, but your
No.
annexes looked great for you there.
Yeah, this deck has been feeling pretty good. It feels like one of the best things you can do in this format right now. Still, opponent's deck didn't really get to function, which was unfortunate, but you know, it is what it is.
Well, yeah, tell us about your deck, like the specifically the annexes we saw go to work there, and everything that kind of comes with that in this iteration of the deck.
So I've been playing red black since like the beginning of the format, and it's gone through a couple different iterations. I haven't really had a chance to play with the actual demons list a whole lot. Like this is my first time playing it in a big event.
Hmm.
But it feels really, really good. Like you have an engine, you have plenty of ways to grind and go late, and just kind of tools to fight almost everything. It feels like so. Yeah, deck feels great. The annex is an awesome card. Huge fan of just the deck in general, I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you mentioned you're crushing this event so far. As far as matchups are
I'm
concerned, is
trying.
there any matchups that you're looking to potentially avoid, ones that you're potentially looking forward to playing against?
So last round I was the backup feature match, and anything where I'm just not familiar, like I got comboed the round before and didn't sideboard as well as I could have. Think I could have done some things differently, but yeah, anything like that. I mean, I know most of the decks in the format, so anything that's just kind of unexpected, catching me off guard, stuff like that. I guess.
Well, and there's been a decent amount of that actually out
Yeah,
there today, it
yeah, there
seems
really
like.
has.
So people are having fun with the format. Well, we expect to see you again throughout the rest of the evening.
Yeah, let's
So,
hope so.
Blake, congrats. How you feeling about your odds the rest of the way?
I feel all right. If I can get annexes going, draw some cards, make some demons, cast some fables, some thought seizes, that should be good.
All right. Well, good luck, man. We appreciate
Thank
it. That
you.
was a great match. Well played. Uh, let's move now. I believe we should be able to get down to a backup match because remember, this is round 6 here in Madison NRG Championship Series. That means the top 8 is being played for in this round for many of these players who are sitting at 4-1, 5-0. Even this is what it all comes down to is these last 2 rounds.
Yeah, and here we have Matthew McGuire on the right hand side of your screen playing Rakdos Sacrifice. It says Rakdos. It's actually technically Jund. There are some Yigra Eater of Alls in this deck list. So, yeah, but basically Rakdos with some Yigras for the combo, and then Daryl kind of playing the more traditional Rakdos mid range, demons, that kind of stuff. As far as the matchup is concerned, I think this is kind of the maybe one of the reasons you would want to play sacrifice instead of the mid-range deck is I think that
Mhm.
but behind the like witch's oven plus cauldron familiar, you have scavenger's talent, you have a lot more ways to just kind of nickel and dime them, and their removal is not really like, not nearly as good against the card witch's oven and cauldron familiar as well. So I think the sacrifice deck is in a pretty good spot here, but we'll have to see how everything plays out.
Yeah. Scavenger's talent there, you see the 1-drop is giving it a pretty different angle as well.
Yeah, no, and as far as the combo is concerned, for the folks at home who are not aware, the combo involves Yigra, Eater of All, which is basically a giant elemental cat that turns all of your other creatures in, or turns all other creatures into food. So if you have Cauldron Familiar X2 with Yigra, one in the graveyard, one in play, you can sacrifice the cat to bring the other cat back, loop that infinitely, and that's infinite drains with the Cauldron Familiar. So it kind of gives the deck not only a way to, you're very good at nickel and diming, but then you also have this kind of just end game of, I'm going to put a Jaeger into play. And what's also nice about Talent is Talent mills yourself, and
Mhm.
then you can mill over the Yigra, and then Chapter 3 allows you to, or Level 3 rather, excuse me,
Yeah.
allows you to sacrifice some permanents to get the Yigra back from your graveyard into play.
A lot going on for a 1 mana card you just kinda deploy and use when you need it.
Oh
It's,
yeah.
um, these sacrifice decks. I've seen a lot. I was there, working through the years of the online events that were just absolutely run over by Cat Oven. So I've seen a lot of Cat Oven in my life, and I have to say I like the Yigra versions of it much more than the versions that plan on just grinding you down 1 point at a time.
Yeah, and for the people who play Arena at home, this Cauldron Familiar actually can block. This is not the nerfed version.
The arena specific cards then showing up in Mystery Boosters 2 with the
Oh, that would be
Orphaldia
so
Alpha,
good.
A
Oh,
plus, loved
yeah,
it.
that'd be great. All right, what's going on here? So there's we got some cat oven shenanigans going on. There's a fable here from Matthew. We got a couple of foods. And I would guess this talent's going to be leveled up this turn. And then what's nice about that, as I mentioned, when you have the talent leveled up, every time you go through the cat oven loop, you're milling 4 cards because you're getting
Mhm.
2 from sacking the cat and 2 from sacking the food. And that basically turbo self mills you a bunch to eventually find the cat. And then in the process of milling, you might mill over a second cat as well. So it's kind of like it in this weird way. Talent is sort of just a 1 card combo by itself. You don't really need a ton else to do with it. And yeah, it's quite the impressive card here.
Yeah, and we do see, leveling it up, as you mentioned, and passing back because, Matthew has everything more or less everything he needs in play. You've got the cat, you've got the oven, you've got a fable, you've got a talent. Those 4 cards, and I suppose you have a food token to go along with it. That's gonna keep the old-fashioned Rakdos mid-range deck, that's trying to attack and block, when the annexes aren't going anyway, at bay for quite a while.
Yeah, and speaking of attacking and blocking, I mean, this is kind of the exact reason why I would rather be on the sacrifice side of things.
Right.
Is in the situation where Daryl is not applying a ton of pressure early on, Matthew just has infinite time to kind of sculpt and set up the combo eventually. The games that you typically lose from the food side of things are the ones that involve, early annex or maybe blade into annex and get you a little bit of drain along the way. But if there's really no aggressive start here from Daryl, and just Daryl's plan is to trade 1 for 1, you can't really do that against the food decks.
Yeah, we also saw Matthew able to fire off a deadly dispute there. You mentioned it, just sculpting the hand accumulating value, and I think Daryl's on 3 lands, just kind of sitting back. Yeah, I'm on the other end of Cat Oven. I know how this goes.
Yeah, and you can imagine Daryl's hand is just full of fatal pushes and cards that don't really work against Cat Oven. You know,
Yeah,
And Matthew also milled over a Mayhem Devil here. So you could potentially even see Chapter 3 on talent, maybe sacrifice a couple of things, get back the Devil, and then have Devil with Cat Oven. Or we just have a Devil in hand, which also does the trick.
I suspect this may end up prompting something from Daryl, um, as Matthew goes to begin here. Maybe. All right. Deadly dispute. Sacrificing a cat. Daryl has seen enough, and honestly, so have I. That's game 1 right there. Put that one
Yeah, I mean,
in the books. Get to the sideboarded games where Daryl has a reasonable chance of interacting with those cards because that's how that goes. So there's not much you can do there. So let's hop straight in to game 2, where we see if Daryl Arrows is able to come up with some graveyard hate for the deck.
Yeah, looks like we're going to be getting into game two in just a second here. But yeah, that was kind of a dominant performance from the Jun Fu deck. Basically, exactly kind of how you would draw it up if you're Matthew. And now that maybe it's possible that Daryl didn't know the matchup, and maybe is more willing to mulligan to an aggressive hand, or how about willing to mulligan to a ley line of the void?
There you go. Always looks pretty good. Now, certainly not unbeatable from the Jun side, but if you're Daryl, that's the cleanest possible start you could have.
Yeah, looking at Matthew's sideboard, we have 2 Paw Patch Formation and 1 Withering Torment. So 3 ways to remove Leyline from the battlefield, assuming that those came in. And, from Matthew's side of things, this is kind of exactly a similar thing to what I was talking about with the Dredgeless Dredge deck.
Mhm.
Is you kind of just always have to assume that your opponent has, some form of graveyard hate. So even if you don't know their full deck list, you're usually going to want to bring in some combination of anti-graveyard hate. And I think most of the Rakdos mid-range decks that I've seen are on Leyline.
Fable on 3 here for Daryl, also pretty good. Obviously, it's the token can get blocked, but that's going to provide value throughout the game here. Mayhem Devil is the reply from Matthew. Pretty strong in its own right. We'll see if he's able to actually untap with that Mayhem Devil and set up any value. But all right, Fable token down, and we'll see what Daryl wants to do here.
Yeah, and you don't even necessarily have to remove the ley line if you're Matthew side of things, because if you
Right.
just have a draw that involves, Devil and some other stuff, then that might be good enough. As we see, it looked like an annex here, and this is kind of what I was talking about in game one, where Daryl didn't really have any pressure. Now going Fable into annex Animate Mutavault, that's going to be a drain for 2 a turn in combination with that ley line, buying him a bunch of time. This is kind of exactly how Daryl wants to play this.
That's right. That is such a strong turn 4 play. Annex, animate the Mutavault, get the trigger immediately. You just do that over a course of a few turns, and it basically represents paying 1 mana to drain your opponent for 2 life. And that goes a really long way. But what else can go a long way is double Mayhem Devil. Now, no ways to get the triggers on them going yet for Matthew, but they are 3/3s. So
Well,
the board is, being pressured a little bit and may prompt some kind of interaction from Daryl. We see the reflection of Kiki Jiki flip. It can't activate quite yet, but it is going to be a consideration from here on out.
remember, Matthew does have that blood token from the Blood Tithe Harvester with the mana up, so does have the ability to potentially shoot, something X2. So
Mhm.
it's a question of, do you want to kill the reflection, or if Daryl animates the Mutavault, do you want to kill that? Kind of depends. Daryl may also not give you the opportunity. Like if Daryl doesn't want the Mutavault to die, he probably just won't animate it. So it kind of depends on what Daryl's working with. But at the bare minimum, even if there's a kill spell that targets one of the devils, you can at least use the blood to kill the Fable. Ooh,
Okay. Second annex
second Mutavault. Yep.
and second Mutavault for Daryl. This is just like we saw Rakdos in the last round play. Don't need to even worry about attacking when you can just drain your opponent for a bunch. And there we go. We do see the blood token. This will get sacrificed, pitching a cat to get exiled. That gets rid of 1 Mutavault. Second Mutavault, though, gets animated. And that means that double Unholy Annex still drains for 4 life.
Yeah, this line would have been fantastic for Matthew if Daryl didn't have the second Mutavault. And I almost, this is kind of exactly how you draw it up for Daryl. Now, still facing down 2 Mayhem Devils. If there's something in Matthew's hand that can trigger them, that can take care of the reflection. I mean, I think the card that Matthew's looking for here is like something like a Blood Tithe Harvester, or maybe a Deadly Dispute. Although you don't really want to sacrifice one of the devils, but you do what you got to do.
Yeah. Looks like we're thumbing a Paw Patch recruiter or a Paw Patch formation. Yeah.
Formation targeting the reflection. Interesting. Okay. So prioritizing getting that off the battlefield, which signifies to me that there probably isn't a way to sacrifice, because if there was, there's a good chance that Matthew would just say, use that to kill the reflection and maybe save the Paw Patch for one of those other 3 enchantments.
Ayers down to 16 after the Mayhem Devils hit. Talent is the follow-up. Well, for all the Ayers has working now, he did lose a land last turn to those Mayhem Devils. So a little constricted on what he's able to do here, especially if he is planning on taxing 1 mana again to activate his Mutavault, which he probably has to do. He doesn't have a ton to work with here. And we're actually going for a tap out, maybe a land. Well, okay. Just kidding. Faked me out, juked me.
And I think I saw a fatal push in Matthew's hand. We're gonna get to see the other card after the Thoughtseize. It was the Deadly Dispute. Okay. So a bit awkward. So interesting line that Matthew could have taken where you could go. Yeah, I guess you could go Paw Patch, cycle, draw a card, make a food, and then sack the food to the dispute, and then use the 2 devil triggers to kill the Fable. That could have been an option, but chose to go for it. That potentially saving the dispute if he drew, something good to sacrifice next turn. But now it's probably just going to get met with a Thoughtseize. Yeah.
Okay. That goes away to the Thoughtseize. So last card in hand for Matthew is now a Fatal Push. Well, this seems like may prompt it. Animating the Mutavault is Daryl.
Yeah, and you can go to end phase. You can go to end phase and respond to the triggers.
Another Mutavault.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, so I think Daryl might have gotten the attack in there. I'm not sure if the damage got through or not, but a second Mutavault does follow. So just full on drain plan right now, and then just keeping Daryl's. Somehow it's actually just racing the Mayhem Devils, who are hitting for 6 a turn.
Yeah, and kind of unfortunate here for Matthew that we couldn't sacrifice the talent to the Deadly Dispute. Probably would have if we could have. But from here, okay, we're gonna do that level 2, and then really wants to try and find something like maybe a Blood Tithe or Thoughtseize is not what he was looking for. Headaches number 3.
Card of the weekend. He picks them up. Look at that. The drain from the Unholy Annexes, making the combat step an afterthought for Rakdos midrange, but Daryl picks it up. Okay, on to game 3 will be these two after that. Some back and forth.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of what I mentioned, where you don't even necessarily need to use the combat phase to kill your opponents with just having and I think this is a lot of why you don't see as much Unholy Annex in Standard. Is Mutavault makes that card so much better. The ability to just have in your mana base, you don't even have to put a creature in your deck that has the word demon, that has the type demon on it. Just in your mana base, a 1 mana way to animate and turn on those annexes. It turns it into it's a completely different card when you're involving Mutavault.
And oh, by the way, it attacks and blocks should you need it to.
It does. It dies to Fatal Push too, but
how about another turn 0 Leyline for Ayers here, making things
pretty good.
Hard on Matthew.
I think he might have even had it on 7 this time. I don't even know if we had to mulligan.
Okay, well, Mutavault on turn 2. I don't know if that necessarily portends a turn 3 Annex, since you wouldn't be able to activate it, of course, till that 4th turn. But Blood Tithe Harvester is going to eat a Torch the Tower. So a little exchange of resources, leaving behind a blood token and a level 2 talent here. And the Duress is going to show what's up. Okay, so we're going to activate our blood token before the Duress, pitching
Trying to blank the Duress. Did we do it?
Did it.
We did. Ygritte 3 lands. I was going to say, what if we potentially just go to the mill plan? Right, where we got a Leyline in play. What if we just mill them out? They draw a second talent, go to level 2, mill you for 4 every time I sacrifice a permanent. If we can't find an answer to the Leyline, that is. But Ygritte, not potentially a bad card down the road, because it does have that ward cost on it. So you do have to sacrifice a food. Now remember, it does turn all creatures into food, which would mean that Daryl only has to sacrifice a creature to pay for the ward cost, but not nothing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Matthew's plan kind of worked there, right? I'm not sure if he really wanted to blank the Duress by hitting another land, but it did set up his draw step, where we're able to hit another spell. We're able to play talent. We're able to level the talent. And okay, hope we find an answer to Shieldred, because it's all about more draining 2 at a time.
Look, I was going to say maybe there's a chance that Matthew can mill out, because we did draw the second Scavenger's talent, but I mean, we're not going to be able to race a shield rip with 4 mils a turn, so
All
that's
right,
not on the
tapping out
table
for
anymore.
Yigra. The Ayers going to read it again. We'll read it too. Yigra, Eater of all 5 mana, 6/6. Ward cost is sacrifice of food. Other creatures are food artifacts in addition to their types. And whenever food's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can put counters on your Yigra. So the ward cost, essentially, if I understand this right, would be sacrifice Shieldred to
Yep.
target Yigra. Or
Well, it could be
Mutavault.
Mutavault. Yeah, it could
Yeah.
be Mutavault. So if there's like a point removal spell. Speaking of which, I'm going to look at Daryl's deck list because these decks don't always have a bunch of 2-mana kill spells.
Mhm.
It looks like Daryl has 2 Go for the Throat in the main and 2 Invoke Despair in the sideboard if those came in. So it looks like instead we just attacked and traded for the Shieldred, which I think you're pretty happy if you're Matthew because you
Yeah.
didn't really have a clean answer to it. So
get
getting it off the
Shieldred
battlefield is good.
Anything's better than that. I mean, the anything in this case was another Mutavault and a Fable. The answer's with a Fable of his own. I mean, anything's better than Shieldred in that spot, though.
Matthew deciding not to level up the talent, instead hold up 3 mana. I think that might signify to Daryl that there is a copy of Deadly Dispute in Matthew's hand, because I think that might be the only thing he would want to hold up. Either that or maybe a Paw Patch.
Okay, we're animating 1 Mutavault. This has been very frisky Mutavaults this game. They've been getting in for basically 3 turns in a row now, I think.
Daryl's got 2 of them too, so I mean he can really go beatdowns if he wants to.
This is something we saw come up yesterday, just the 2-color mana vases versus the 3-color mana vases, being able to play utility lands at different rates coming up. So it was actually an Abrade that Matthew was holding up there and is able to use that to clear the token from the Fable. Another Fable arrives, but okay, Matthew, here you get a shot to draw something new, and board's clear for the moment. Cycle.
Yeah,
Pitch to the
discarding
Fable there. Yeah.
Blood Crypt to the Fable. Really wants to try and find. I'm trying to think of what would even be his best draw from this spot. Like maybe
It's very behind on resources just overall.
maybe a Mayhem Devil, but doesn't really have a ton of ways to utilize that. Deadly Dispute, nothing to sacrifice to it. Not when you're in this spot with an empty graveyard versus a ley line, it's really hard to, because you kind of do need you need something else going on for a lot of the top decks to be good, because there's a lot more synergy involved in these decks.
Shieldred's Edict is the card. Okay.
Yeah, and this is another thing that I was kind of talking about early with in terms of the matchup, right? Where the Rakdos mid-range deck is all about 1-for-1ing and in gaining a little bit of card advantage here and there, and the Jund Food deck is a lot more about synergies. But you'll notice in this game, Matthew drew the Abrade, the Shieldred's Edict, Fatal Push, a Thoughtseize, like a lot of 1-for-1s. I think that's the cards that Daryl wants Matthew to draw on average. Daryl's trying to avoid all of those high synergy cards, so it's kind of a situation where if you're playing those 1-for-1s, it's almost like you're playing a worse version of Rakdos midrange.
Exactly. Oh, full level on both of the talents now. Transform
just in case.
Yeah, transform the Reflection of Kiki Jiki for Matthew, but he's got to feel extremely far behind here. Obviously, Daryl was even comfortable enough to let Mutavault go to that Edict. The Annex is still sticking around. So a lot going on here for Daryl. And this makes the Demon, we'll tapping out for that. But hey, the Demon is going to be enough that even without the Mutavault, he is able to ensure the drain. Plus, it's a big flyer on its own. So, Matthew, unless there's something great on top of the deck here, we're going to see Daryl complete the comeback here.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of sort of night and day, right? You saw game 1, Matthew kind of just easily ran away with the game without any graveyard hate. And then both the post-board games, Daryl had Leyline of the Void, and that's really all he needed.
Yeah, that did it. So, all right, Daryl Ayers moving to 5-1. That is 6 rounds in the book, Doom. That means we have one more to go here in Madison before our top 8. And I think we probably have that waiting for you not too far around the corner. So stick with us here. We will be back with more Pioneer action from Madison, Wisconsin. Thanks for hanging out with us in our G Series. See you on the other side.